Questions are a funny thing. You can be entirely confident that you have the right one, and because you have the right one, you get the right answer. However, just because the answer is correct, that doesn't mean you're right. You make a tremendous assumption that you're right, when all reality, you're standing on very shaky ground. You can have a right answer to a wrong question. And if you never question the question, then it might lead you somewhere absolutely disastrous. And that's what we're talking about today. The question, in the end, matters more than the answer. Case in point, take for instance the American South and kudzu. It was the 1930s through 40s, and the Dust Bowl was in full swing in the American South and the Midwest. Farmers were being displaced by the thousands. Crops were lost by the acres. Farms dried up. Families displaced. And the New Deal was in motion. The question at the time was actually very reasonable, and it was incredibly urgent. What do we do about all this erosion, and how do we get instant erosion control? However, the need for an answer to that particular question was a result of a question that came a decade earlier. You see, after World War I, the demand for wheat skyrocketed. And what that meant is more wheat meant more money. And that meant a much better survival. And one of the reasons this was even able to happen was because new technology. And with new technology, this allowed farmers to plow the Great Plains in a way that they had never been plowed before. Prairies and native grasses, they were now gone. They were being replaced by monocultural crops. The soil, in all honesty, in hindsight, was being overworked. And the landscape was essentially stripped. And this didn't seem like a problem at the beginning because there was plenty of rain. However, the droughts came, and with the droughts came the Dust Bowl. And with the Dust Bowl came displacement and failed farms. So the government stepped in and tried to solve this particular emergency. They needed a fast solution, a scalable solution, and they found one. They found the answer in kudzu. Kudzu is a very fast-growing vining legume from East Asia. It actually grows up to a foot per day in ideal conditions. It's nitrogen fixing, it's great on steep slopes, and it was, according to the government, a quote-unquote miracle plant. The government didn't just suggest it, they actually promoted it. They paid farmers $8 per acre to plant this stuff. It was the Soil Conservation Service branch of the federal government that was behind trying to solve the problem of soil and soil erosion. However, I don't think the Soil Conservation Service actually communicated with the Plant Conservation Service because what happened in the aftermath of the planting of this was absolutely disastrous. Kudzu had no natural predators, and so the hot, humid South was ideal conditions for it to thrive. And boy, did it thrive. And by the 1950s and 60s, it was smothering forests, it was choking out native plants, it was covering barns, telephone poles, everything. It was taking over everything. The plan to solve erosion control created an ecological disaster. By the 1990s, kudzu has covered 7 million acres across the South, from Texas to Georgia and the Carolinas, all the way up into Illinois and Pennsylvania. And by 1997, the USDA finally officially labeled it as a noxious weed. And today, it's infamous. In the end, kudzu became a symbol of completely losing control, of good intentions gone awry, of what happens when we ask the wrong question and just pursue the answer assuming we have the correct one. But you know what? This just isn't about the South. It's not about kudzu in the end. It's about us. Because we've all inherited in this world the fallout of good answers to bad questions. You might be listening to this right now, so stuck in traffic on a 6-lane freeway that was paved in response to a particular question about how do we move more people faster from here to there without asking a broader question about holistic planning. Or maybe you're riding a train or walking through a city with decent transit, but when you step off the platform, you're met with a wall of gray, of concrete building after concrete building. Looks like a containment cell more than actual community. We were promised efficiency and we were sold progress, but we ended up living in places that don't feel like anywhere. And very few of us, almost none of us, are listening to this thing right now, sitting on a porch in some sort of beautiful, timeless, charming home in a beautiful, timeless, charming neighborhood where the streets were actually designed and built with care, with an artistic touch, where the architecture speaks to you, where the scale draws you in and welcomes you, and where the place actually has meaning. That elusive thing, that magic we call a sense of place, that went missing long ago, right around the Dust Bowl, and we've been trying to patch that hole ever since. I didn't even know I was looking for it. I wasn't some prodigy sketching city plans at age 10. I didn't ace art school by any stretch of the imagination. I didn't even get in. I was lost. I was pretty narrow in my view, and I was wrestling with the question that I didn't know how to ask. And so, like a lot of people in their early 20s, I just took a job. And it wasn't really my dream job. It wasn't a super career move. It was more like a paycheck. And the crazy things, I became a flight attendant of all things for American Airlines based out of Chicago. It wasn't super glamorous, wasn't intentional. It was, however, accidentally perfect. The reason it was perfect is because it dropped me night after night into 100 different cities and many different neighborhoods, from Boston to Bakersfield and Manhattan to Minneapolis. And as I wandered those streets, I had a fresh pair of eyes every single time, and I started to notice something. Some places just felt right. You wanted to walk in them and sit them. You just wanted to stay. Others, they just felt hollow and empty, like you were just passing through, even if you lived there. And that's when the real question began to form. It was the why. Why do some places make us feel alive, and why do others make us feel like we're in the way? So that question, why do some places feel alive? Why do some places have that sense of place and others just feel absolutely empty? That was the important question that really began to formulate in my soul as I traveled from place to place and layover after layover. And I want to talk about 4 briefly that had significant impacts on my clarity of understanding, because I could compare and contrast my experience in all these different layovers. Number 1 was Syracuse, New York. Now, as a disclaimer to all those who live in Syracuse, I granted that your downtown is actually pretty cool. There's a lot of stuff going on, really cool buildings, historical and otherwise. But the hotel where we stayed was in the outskirts of town off the freeway. Because I was so junior as a flight attendant, I never got the really cool trips that were to New York and LA and DC and all that type of stuff, even though I did at some occasions. But most of my trips were to fairly insignificant locations and to insignificant hotels. Nothing to write home about. And in the case of the Syracuse trip, it was always a late in, late out, so you had to stay closer to the airport. The hotels that exist close to airports, you all know exactly what I'm talking about. They exist in a parking lot off of some highway. And because they exist in a parking lot off of some highway, they aren't really any place. As a pedestrian, you're stuck there. They're not really next to anything. They're just near-ish to the city. Everything is too far to walk to, too awkward to taxi anywhere because it's too short, and too isolated to explore. There's no corner cafe, no cute little park bench to just sit at. And if there is a bench, it's going to probably be for a bus stop off the highway. And it was interesting because I always remember there's this glamour associated with travel. I tell you what, when you go and you travel, you'll end up in some hotel that's situated off the highway next to an airport. And there's not much glamour associated with that. You wanted something to do, but there's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. Was it a bad place? Not necessarily. It just wasn't any place, anywhere. And so anyone who stayed in one of these things knows exactly what I'm talking about. Hotels of this nature just make it, honestly, even incredibly difficult to eat anywhere because the restaurant is probably across the street of 4 lanes of traffic that's going 55 miles an hour, and you have to play Frogger just to get to the other side so you can get a nice meal and then jump back, since there aren't any stoplights or sidewalks. That was the experience in my layovers of Syracuse, New York. And then came Palm Springs. Palm Springs was amazing. The weather was fantastic, but the crazy thing is that the airport is this open air tent structure that as you walked off the plane, you're walking into charm right from the get-go. A beautiful sense of place. We got to the hotel. It wasn't too far away from the downtown area, so we just walked to it. And the streets narrowed. It's almost like the pedestrian was the most important person on that particular street, not the cars. And when that happens, everything changes because it just felt right. It felt livable. The streets didn't repel you. It was walkable. You didn't need a car. You just needed an appetite and some curiosity. And one of the things I remember thinking and walking through Palm Springs is why can't other cities do this? Is it a weather thing? Do you have to have just perfect temperatures in order to create incredible environments? I guarantee it probably helps. And then after Palm Springs came Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, the similarities, it had great weather, but it had an incredible overdependence on cars, the likes of which the world had never actually seen. Now, one of the things to make known is I had lived in Glendale, and just right around Glendale, which is adjacent to Los Angeles, just a neighbor. It borders it. And I lived there for a couple of years prior to becoming a flight attendant, but I had a car when I lived there. And so everything still seemed very normal to me. I didn't have the same experience as I did as a flight attendant when I was subject to being a pedestrian. I was bound by foot in the city meant for cars. That's a big problem. And my perspective entirely changed because that is an enormous problem as a pedestrian in a city designed for cars. Every time you cross one of these large commercial streets, it felt like you were taking your life in your own hands trying to get from here to there. Speaking of Game of Frogger, it's like this one was intense. Fortunately, there were street lights and a whole bunch of sidewalks. The streets were full, the sidewalks were empty. It was a city of millions, but it seemed like everyone was still so alone. How can you have this many people living together, yet everything seems still so far away? All the little neighborhoods that comprise Los Angeles never really seemed to have a beautiful central core that was truly walkable and had that sense of place. It was just gas station after strip mall, after freeway, after gas station, strip mall, freeway. And then these quarantined off neighborhoods and subdivisions that were detached from the commercial sections. Everywhere was nowhere, just endless commotion. But in the end, for all of you Angelinos, I get it. You still have Santa Monica. Oh, wait, that's even a different city. Sorry, LA's got issues. Manhattan, New York, opposite from Los Angeles in virtually every way. It was a city that was designed for people and not just for cars. There was always somewhere to go, something to see, people to watch, someplace to eat. The city was always alive. It didn't matter the time, the day, the night. It didn't matter. The entire city had a character. The architecture was just speaking to you. The absolutely beautiful brownstones of the Upper West Side, the towers of the financial district, and the shopping on Fifth Avenue, Central Park. It's like the streets were dancing. Didn't matter what time it was. The city was alive. And that was one of the first times I really felt, okay, so this is what it means to have a city that's really designed for people, not just for cars. And I fully recognize that there are two very different types of living. There are some people who love big city living, and there are some people who love small town living, and the spectrum in between. But it's interesting because the same principles that create a sense of place for those large cities are the same principles that create a sense of place for the small cities. And that's what our investigation is. So regardless of whether you're a big city person or a small city person, what our investigation here is to ask the right questions so that we can begin to intentionally design the cities in which we live so that we actually want to be there. So we don't have to go on vacation to some of these epic places, but we can actually feel like we're on vacation in our own home. And at this time, the reality is I didn't have any architecture degree. I didn't have the terminology to describe what I was seeing and what I was sensing, but what I had was a feeling. And with that feeling came the understanding that I was beginning to understand that some cities were built for cars and others for people. And if that was true, then what kind of stuff did I want to help create? Because at that moment, everything started becoming very, very personal. And it wasn't just, hey, why is this just bad? No. It was, how could I participate in the building of environments where people actually want to be? And just a little more information here. While I was a flight attendant, I lived in Chicago at the time in the Jefferson Park neighborhood. It was on the Blue Line, a little bit closer to the airport than to downtown. And I lived in a small little 600 square foot, one bedroom apartment. It was a corner unit, ground floor, right across the street from the park in Jefferson Park. The train station to downtown and also to O'Hare, less than 5-minute walk away. And just behind my building, the grocery store and Walgreens, right around the corner, the post office, the library, public services. Everything I needed was right there. The magic of it all was I didn't need a car. I was broke, I was single, and somehow I was just fine. And it wasn't because of the architecture, it was because of the arrangement of the parts and pieces. And the architecture just accentuated and provided that wall. And the architecture just helped. It facilitated. And honestly, there was nothing grand about the apartment I lived in, though it was the most historic of the apartments in the neighborhood. Little did I know that even in my early 20s, my aesthetic would lean more towards the historic. But the interesting thing about all of it was all of my daily needs were just right there in close walkable proximity. There was just a real quiet coherence to the neighborhood. In fact, like I would go on jogs, and a few blocks down, as I was jogging through residential neighborhoods that were just primarily houses, the lots would start getting bigger. And then they'd start getting smaller again. And lo and behold, you're another neighborhood center. And it all just made sense. There was a pattern to it. There was a rhythm to it. If I wanted to go downtown to the lakefront, just hop on a bus or a train, within half hour, I'm there. This particular neighborhood that I lived in, it wasn't like trying to impress anyone. It wasn't super grand. It was very modest, and it wasn't trying to impress me. It was just trying to serve me. And because it served me, I came to love it. And so I began to love Chicago in a way that I never ever learned to love LA. Even though LA had more glamour, glitz, coastline, weather was amazing. The reality, Chicago's little coastline on Lake Michigan was frozen half the year. But it wasn't necessarily all the things, the superficial things that you'd think would generate a love for a place. It was the underlying sense of place, the neighborhoods, kind of that collective neighborhood feel and culture, arrangement of parts and pieces in ways that really served my needs when I lived there, that LA never could and never did. So as we come to the conclusion of the first episode in my journey of my discovery, I hope that all of us can really begin to open our eyes in the way that I began to open my eyes at that particular time and began to see the world in a way that I had never seen it before, to get outside of my little isolation pod, which is called an automobile or a car, just going from here to there and here to there, and actually sit in a place and see if there was a lot more that a place had to offer than just a parking lot. So we will begin asking those questions. So we'll begin exploring two different sets of questions. The questions that led to the world in which we live, which the majority of us, in all honesty, live in places that were designed for cars and not people. And then we're going to ask the questions that hopefully are a whole lot better, that could begin to produce cities and environments that actually have a sense of place, that are much better for our own personal flourishing. As the scales drip from our eyes like mine did 30 years ago, we'll begin to see the world in a new way and appreciate it in a new way. Observe things that we hadn't seen before. So join me on the next episode as we explore a little bit further how we can actually create a sense of place.